What is up, everybody? Thank you guys for tuning in to this next episode of the TBF Avenger. This is a full build series on this TBF, and I'm actually building both Decale versions. One version is George W. Bush's, and another is a gray scheme. So you get a nice tri-colored blue scheme and a nice tri-colored gray scheme. These kits I got off eBay, pre-sealed, and they were in great condition. You can see the kit features raised panel line details, but as you can notice that there's a whole bunch of rivets in this thing, so it does actually offer a lot of good detail. The only problem is that on the interior there's literally hardly any detail. They don't even offer a seat that's separate from the pilot, so I actually had to custom build one of the seats. There are receded panel lines in some areas of this kit, which in the end just adds to more detail and more realistic features. But let's face it, it's a Monogram kit. We all know what we're getting ourselves into. The propeller has their regular decent features, and the door and everything. All the fits were really good on this kit too. There was really only one spot that was kind of warped a little bit and didn't glue right. So that is the interior of the cockpit, and as you can see is very plain. But these are the clear parts, and they are not in bad condition whatsoever. The instructions are your typical Monogram Revell instructions, whereas they just draw out exactly what you're supposed to do at the right time, and eventually this thing just pops together. And again, like I said, I'm building both Decale versions, so you get to see both of these airplanes in the final shots. Now, in this kit, there is a lot of flashing and sprues to clean up to get these together right. So just make sure you do a lot of cleanup, and eventually, after you get all those sanded out, the thing just goes together. Like most Navy series Monogram kits, this kit does feature the landing gear that go up and down. So this is a feature on the kit that I wanted to display. I just like building the kits the way they're supposed to be built. I don't think there's a lot of necessary parts that need to go into this, other than maybe a seat to add interior detail here and there. And honestly, I kind of laugh at how much detail there isn't. When I look at the build and go through it and see it, I just kind of laugh because it's just kind of funny to see how dinky it actually is. But I go through a lot of airbrushing techniques in this video, and as you can see right now, I'm going through some olive drab and then I'm spraying some yellow on top of that to give it some weathering effects. I go through a number of different things to add some life into this interior. This is just one of the ways I do it, just so I don't have to put so much work into the cockpit on an older kit like this, because come on, let's face it, there's way better kits to get to. Tamiya kits, Edward kits, so I just want to make sure that I'm getting to those kits that I actually really want to build while doing a decent model with a Monogram kit and remembering how funky and kind of undetailed they are. Now I'm spraying and highlighting the panel lines and different type of things that would be in the cockpit if it weren't so bland in here with some brown color. I just go around and highlight some areas with the brown, trying to do it in straight lines, but not really achieving that much over that yellow. I'm literally just using USAF brown just to highlight these areas. I just go around where I think that these darker shades would be. Now I'm using some AK pencils to kind of make a little bit of faux panel lines inside the interior, just to highlight that just a little bit. I know it doesn't look good right now, but you end up fading it in, and it kind of does at least something, other than cutting out sprue and working on an 80-year-old kit when I could be building a perfectly brand new Tamiya kit right now. So I'm just trying to get this thing going as good as it can, and enough to remember it, and good enough to be on my shelf. And for what it is and how much work I did put into it with seams, panel lines, stuff like that, it actually did turn out really good. So just stay tuned for the final result, because these things look sweet once they're done. I fade those lines in with a little bit of water and just kind of fade it out. Now I'm just touching up with a little bit of a lighter green and just going over it lightly. This stuff is thinned like 80%, 20% thinner. So not too much thinning, but I just wanted to cover up this brown and yellow and just get a nice green tone on the interior. Also, using the different green and different tones of green helps a lot too, with adding a little bit of weathering techniques to it. Next, my final step is to just silver this model up a little bit using a sponge and dipping it into the paint and then rubbing a little bit off onto a paper towel. Not too much though to ruin the texture and make it too cloudy, but just enough so that it comes out with a nice chipped look. I rotate the sponge as much as I can to get a different type of texture around the whole model instead of just having one texture splattered on the same part. But then I rub it on the corners and all the raised edges, and then that really gives it a nice kind of weathered look there on the edges. At this point, I do make sure my sponge is basically dry. Like there's not a lot of paint on it whatsoever. It's just basically dry, and want to make sure that I don't ruin all my paintwork that I put into it. I typically want to highlight all the corners of areas. That's where it works the best. Now that that's done, I can now custom build a interior seat, since the one that it came with a pilot and it was like kind of too small for this one. So I sanded off these extra sprue parts from a Bondi kit and then clipped them out. I actually did go to a hobby store and look for styrene, but they didn't have any, so I opted for this route anyways. Clipped them off and just glued four square pieces together. And this was the start of my seat. This was a bit tricky, as I could have just went online and bought some seats, but since I didn't really have time for that, I figured I'll record it and make some seats myself. Now that I had those done, I'll set those aside to dry and focus on the actual build of the model. So this part just doesn't even get glued in here. It just gets set in there, and you can test out how the tail wheel works. And it works pretty good. Once that's in, I figure out where it actually needs to be glued and where it doesn't need to be glued. I can move on to the next step, which is the windows, before I glue the fuselage halves together. I trimmed the windows as they did have a lot of plastic on the outside of them. I had to do a lot of trimming and sanding and stuff like that. So I glue them into the interior of the model with some clear glue. You definitely want to make sure that you trim these windows enough so they fit in correctly. Next, I use a razor saw to actually separate it from the sprue, as this is a good safe step to ensure that it doesn't crack on you. So I did all these steps for each airplane, since I'm doing two decal versions. All these steps are basically the same, with alterations in a little bit of color here and there. The interiors are basically the same, and everything that I did on one was done to the other. So the interiors are pretty similar. Now I'm installing the interior into the interior of the fuselage. With a little bit of finagling, you can get these parts on just fine. The plastic is so pliable. It's kind of hard plastic, so really you're not going to have to worry about any bending or anything like that. You can just bend it as much as you want and get it in there. And the fit's pretty good on this kit. I'm surprised that a kit this old would fit this good, but all the parts fit literally perfectly. If you did your trimming right, it's going to fit together good. Next, I just glue one part at a time, so one part of the fuselage at a time, to ensure that it has good glue adhesion and nothing goes wrong in the process, so that I don't have to do a bunch of cleaning up and seams to fill. I apply a little bit of extra glue to this process, as I do want some extra time to work. But as you can see, you just click it together and it ends up pretty good. With a little bit of pressure for the front, it helps a lot. Next, I can move back onto the seats as they were dry. So now I'm back onto the seats. I'm clipping these side seats basically, and then I'm gonna sand them down with this little round sander. This was a really awesome way to do this. I had no problems with the sander or the seat or it falling apart on me, so I would definitely recommend this for custom built seats again. I'm pretty sure this is 80 grit sandpaper on this little electric drill, but it literally ripped the plastic apart perfectly, just the way I wanted it. And then I can take some Tamiya putty after this and smooth it out. So I just go around the outside and make nice curved edges around where I think that a seat would look like. And eventually it turned out the way it turned out. Pushing it down into the armrest here actually made a curved edge perfect. So, and then I can also take it to the outside so that the plastic wasn't so thick, as I think it was a lot thinner in realistic terms. But this is just a cheap and easy quick fix for now. I actually made it so that the cockpit could come apart, so that if I did want to upgrade this kit later on, I could. Now I'm filling in these seams with some water-based plastic putty, and this works really good to just smooth everything out and make sure that the seat is looking cohesive and like a solid piece of metal instead of 4 pieces of plastic screwed together. I just take a Q-tip with some water on it and smooth it out just like that. And eventually it gets squished into all the corners and all the seams, and then you're done. Make sure to not use too much water in this step, as it will dilute the plastic putty way too much and it'll just take everything right off. So just make sure you just do a little bit at a time and make sure it dries right, and then you should be good to go. I also made sure the top and the bottom corners were rounded nicely so that it looked kind of like a seat instead of like 4 pieces of plastic together. I do this step multiple times after it's dried and everything, just to make sure that I didn't do too much water. Next, I take a toothpick and really cram it into those seams and make it look like there's kind of welded together. This seemed to work pretty good. Next, I can now fill the fuselage seams. They weren't bad, but they needed some filler and they needed some work in order to get them to be a good quality so that it wasn't so blatantly obvious that the fuselage was glued together. So I took a file and a knife and just scraped and sanded until they looked about right, but there was some spots, so I ended up just putting a whole bunch of Tamiya plastic filler on and sanding it out after later. I applied the same steps that I did to the fuselage to the wings, just gluing one part at a time and making sure that it was all together perfectly good, just so I didn't have to run into any problems later, as I was already having to fill in a bunch of areas on this kit. This is 3M tape I just cut to size and put on around the whole model. It's cheap tape and it works good, and also it doesn't ruin the plastic or leave any residue on the plastic after it's done. These are abrasion holes that I really, I wasn't going to fill them at all, actually. I was just going to leave them. I didn't care. But I was like, you know what? I've never done it before, and it only took a few minutes. And that's literally what it took. It only took a few minutes to just put some plastic putty in there and wipe it away with water. Now, there's 2 different ways to deal with this plastic putty, and I wanted to show that in this video. So the first way is I'm actually going to sand this putty out, and that works pretty good. But I can also show you that the plastic putty, just using water on it, is perfectly fine too. So here are some of the seams that I'm noticing, and as you can see on the top, those were filed down, but there is a seam there and a little bit of gaps and divots and stuff. So after I put on all the tape and put on all the Tamiya putty, I can now sand it out and file it. I use a filing thing first, and then I go in with other sanding sponges that are like 1000 grit and above to just smooth everything out perfectly. It's really important to use the tape at this point because it saves a lot of raised detail that you'd have to fix later on, and if you just tape it at the right point, then you don't have to do anything to the kit after that. Next, I filed down the wings as they were dried. I use a file at the start and then 1200 grit paper at the end to just finish it off. That way they're nice and smooth and consistent. Now I can install the landing gear that retract. With these kits, I don't want to put too much detail into the landing gear bay or the interior, just because they are older kits and it's okay to build an older kit like this. Like, you know, you're not going to die because you built a kit unaccurately. It's a hobby. It's a piece of plastic, man. You're going to have a good time building it, then that's all that matters. And I just really had a good time building these kits. It brought back a lot of fun memories that I built building Revell kits after that Corsair that I threw in the garbage. These were just really fun, as I really did. I love the Avenger. So just fitting these parts was kind of it was a pain. Let me just be honest. It was a pain. But in the end, it worked out. It just took a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, and yeah. And I'm pretty sure they made this kit so that the wings actually folded back. If you built this kit and were able to do that with these wings, that would be awesome to hear about. But I did have to do some filing in order to get these wings to fit properly. Once everything was trimmed and filed away perfectly, then I could finally fit the wings together in the right spot. Then I could actually apply some filler in this area and finally be done with this step, as this was a little bit frustrating as I had to shave away a lot of stuff in order to make it fit right. I used this plastic putty so that I didn't ruin all that raised detail on the model, and this worked really well. It filled in all the seams and I was able to clean it away nice and easily without ruining any details. Again, be careful in this step not to use too much water, as if you do use too much water, it will like wash out all the material and you have to start over. I stuck on the elevators, And then we can sand off this white material. Now, as you can see, it is kind of tricky to sand, but it's a lot easier to just wipe away. You can just literally lick your finger and wipe this stuff away. So I highly recommend just using water for this step, and if you need another coat, apply the next coat, because it was way harder to sand, but it is possible to sand too. Next, I can fit this door on perfectly. And these little covers. I think these are covers for if the wings folded or not, or something. I'm not sure. It didn't really work in this kit, and the kit thing provided. Next, I'm drilling out the exhaust holes. I found this cone-shaped Dremel tool, and I thought that would work perfect on these little exhaust things. And it really did. It just took a little bit of time and really just trying to grind out that plastic. So I just use this tool to whittle around as much as I can and open up that space as good as I can. This isn't very visible, so it's not a necessary step, but I definitely think it gives it a little bit of life and helps with the realism of the model. Then I just apply some CA glue and clean up that dust around it. Now that the molding is done for the interior seats, I can now put on some seat belts made from Tamiya tape. I just cut the 3mm tape in half and use that as a seat belt and just tape it to the surface. Once those are taped, I paint the whole seat in an interior green, and this is the second seat belt here. Even just doing these two simple steps, it does add a lot of detail into the actual kit itself. I think the next seat belt I do, I'm actually going to double up the Tamiya tape as it might be more realistic. Now I can move on to the canopy. So I'm using 3mm and 5mm Tamiya tape to tape off this canopy, and yes, I am doing two kits, so I did have to tape off two canopies like this. I didn't buy any aftermarket vinyl or anything like that for this kit, as I really couldn't find anything specific for this kit, so I just opted to just do it myself, and it was the easy way out, kind of. I trim the edges with a brand new razor blade and go across all my cross sections after I get all of my vertical sections done. Make sure you use a brand new razor blade, as this will help with the final finish of the cut. It will make it a lot straighter and a lot easier to cut at the end. And your tape won't have any jagged edges. Next, I paint the seat belts with some ivory white. I don't mind if the seat belts have a little bit of a jagged edge to them, as they wear fabric, so it kind of makes it look more realistic. Even though it's not as neat as some other seat belts, it does make it look a little bit realistic, kind of ripped and torn. Then I can paint all my stuff black that needs to be black, like the prop and the wheels, all in some black primer, just to start off this process. You want to do your wheels and primer for later instances, I'll show. Next, I paint the interior of the engine. This engine was not very detailed whatsoever, but I was able to use the highlights and certain aspects of the engine to my advantage in this kit and make it look as best as I could. Next, I take the gun and a pencil and just rub the pencil dust onto the gun, and that was my finish for the gun. You could also silver this part or do any type of weathering you'd want to this gun, or any type of detailing as well, but I just opted to do this as it's a pretty easy finish and also looks pretty realistic and gun-like. So it's just a quick and easy thing to do. I attach the gun to the turret mount and then the turret mount to the windscreen. And as you can see, that is all taped up as well. Next, I use some super glue to attach the seat to the interior of the cockpit so it looks realistic. Well, quote unquote realistic. Now I silver the engine. As the engine was sprayed with flat black, I can then go back with a dry brush and highlight all these nice details in there to make it look spick and span like it's a real engine. And like I said, there was enough detail in this that it did work out to highlight these details and make it look semi-realistic. I then paint the front mount of the motor just to give it a little bit of kind of pizzazz a little bit, because I like having my airplanes a little bit different. So I painted one with PRU blue and this next one with some light gray. The instructions actually say to paint this with a light gray, so I opted for this one to be the blue one and the other one to be the gray one, just so there's a little bit of contrast and make that motor look realistic. I then apply some aluminum and steel to each propeller as to give them a little bit of variation as well. I just apply multiple light thin coats to give this propeller a realistic look. Then I go on to the yellow tips and all that off camera, as you know how to do that, and that's just super typical if you're building 1/48 scale aircraft. I usually always use Vallejo paints for everything, but especially just regular brushing. Now I'm attaching the canopy with some clear glue, and it's going to be removed later so that you can install the turret. So just make sure that you don't put this on first. You have to install it with some liquid tape or something like that in order to take it off later. Now I can prime the model. I'm using Vallejo black with some Vallejo thinner, and that seems to help this flow, and I'm using about 30 psi for this process as to get a nice even finish with blowing some dust away as it goes. I applied a nice thin smooth coats as to achieve the smoothest surface as possible. Next, I spray the canopy so that it looks like the interior of it is painted with some Vallejo green. And I also do this step on the other surfaces that are clear too. After I was done with this step, then I could move on to the modeling stage. I wanted to have both these kits look different, not like I had airbrushed them in the same setting. So what I did was I modeled a certain way on this blue aircraft, and I modeled the gray one a certain way, and I'm going to show each way, as they both work good and they also both highlight specific areas of the airplane. So with the blue one, I wanted the panel lines to be accented more, so I went with modeling inside the panel lines, just inside the panel lines, and that's it on this blue aircraft, as that will lead into better contrast with the panel lines and stuff and make them pop out more later. Some people say that this step doesn't really matter, but I think on this finish it really did, especially since blue is such a dark color. You just want to do everything in your power to make sure you get the different tones and colors in the panel lines. So I got a 50-50% ratio here with some airbrush thinner and Vallejo white, and I'm just running at about 25 psi. So not very high psi, and I think I actually adjusted my airbrush as well to run a little bit lower, so it might have been around 17. Now, I did this around the whole model, but I just wanted to make clear that this is the underside of the airplane, and it makes a big difference in the end scheme of things, especially when you're doing a white, as these areas do end up making it a lot more toned and a lot more really weathered. As you can see, I'm just being careful to stay inside those panel lines and do as best as I can. On this next gray aircraft, I do the modeling technique, but I don't make sure to stay inside the panel lines. Those will be dealt with in the next step. I just wanted to make sure that there was contrast between light and dark and get all my shading and highlighting in this stage. Just a cheap, easy, and quick modeling tone just to get on with the build. But rest assured, this is a nice steady process to get a nice finish on your model. So as you can see all those panel lines, and you can see the white marks, and that's just perfect for what exactly I wanted to do. And then on this other one, you can see how it's highlighted in gray and white in areas, and just super super detailed looking. So it definitely is a difference, but when you get down in the nitty gritty and you get that paint on there, there isn't a lot of difference after the fact. Next, I then model the top of each airplane. I use the same process as on the top on each aircraft, as I'm going to undershade some different colors and make different colors pop out rather than just do the black and white schemes. So this is the blue aircraft, and I'm modeling inside all those panel lines again. But I want to make sure that these panel lines are highlighted as to get that blue color as much contrasted as possible, so that there's a lot of life and it doesn't just look like a glossy sea blue. For the underside of the gray model, as it was a grayer color on the bottom, I wanted to really accent all of these panels. So what I did is I used a brown color on certain panels and just randomly picked certain panels to spray and sprayed those areas. I thinned it down to about 80-20% thinner and just sprayed the areas that I could and what I thought looked best. I also did the fuselage as well, as to kind of make it uniform. With us being human, it's kind of hard to pick random spots, so I kind of struggled with this step. I kind of looked at the other side and looked at this side and made sure I wasn't doing the same panel, or not every single panel the same, you know. But then I went ahead with another color as to highlight a different type of shade. The first color was a brown color, and the second color was basically like a tan color, I think. And I'm just going around highlighting different panels as I see fit. The same type of mixture was used on this next color, where I'm about 17 psi and 20% thinner. So it's not thinned out completely, you know, but it's thinned out enough. Now I use a yellow ochre color at the last stage to highlight the rest of the panel lines. Now at any point you can always fix all of your stuff if you miss a line or whatever, so it doesn't really matter where you put this paint. But I always just try to be careful to eliminate overworking myself, basically. And also, I played a little game with this. I basically just looked with my eyes, and as soon as my eyes caught a surface or an area, I would paint that section. And then I went on to the next one. I would just randomly pick a section and then paint it. Whether it was next to something or the same panel as the other side, it didn't matter. I just randomly tried to be as random as possible at this step. I use this yellow color on pretty much all the movable surfaces, and just to highlight those areas as being different types of metals or whatever I was going for. So then I used some gray to highlight the extra panels that were left over, maybe the bigger areas and some of the smaller areas as well. And I also used this process on both of these models. As you can see, I'm flipping back and forth between each model. One had the panel lines accented, and this one had the modeling all over the whole surface. I did the same steps on both models as to bring out those colors in both the model kits. And again, I just want to reiterate that, like, whenever you're doing with raised panel lines, you just want to take every precaution and every measurement just to make sure that there's enough life and enough, because with recessed panel lines, you don't have to do a lot. Just do your panel lines and then your wash, and you're pretty much good to go. But with these raised panel lines, you can lose a lot of detail and make the model look really toyish if you don't take these steps, like shading and coloring. And to make a model look really good, I feel like you have to do all these steps. So next, I'm going over the panel lines with a brown color, as I wanted to make it seem like not rusty, but kind of just like ship dirty, because these things were disgusting on the ships, let's just be real. So I wanted to have squiggly lines everywhere and make this thing look brownish underneath that white paint. Here I'm using USAF Brown by Vallejo, and I thinned it out to about 50-50, maybe even 60-50 to thinner. And this is a really good way to get that paint nice and thin. Now, a lot of people say that you can't use Vallejo, but that's just untrue. For the other model, I use a darker shade to highlight those panel lines a lot better. I just wanted the variation between the two kits, as the processes were pretty much the same. So I just wanted a lot of variation on this blue kit. So that's what I ended up doing. And like I was saying, with the Vallejo paints, it's definitely possible to paint accurately Vallejo paints. It's just a simple procedure. You have to strain all the paint first. If you strain all the paint first, you're not going to have any problems. And then once you strain the paint, if you do mix in the Vallejo thinner, it helps so much with the leveling and everything. So if you just strain the paint and use the Vallejo thinner, you're not going to have any problems with Vallejo. Yeah, you might have some tip dry here and there, but I honestly didn't have any problems this go around with using the thinner. So I definitely highly recommend Vallejo paints. It's acrylic, it's easy, and they're also really easy to mix. You can even mix just regular water with it. That's how I usually do it. This is the first time actually using thinner, and it did actually work with the primers a lot better. So just so you know, Vallejo paint's a way to go if you're a new beginner modeler and you don't want to deal with lacquers. As you can see, the finish is very good, and you can see all those nice panel lines underneath that kind of translucent white surface. Next, I'd go ahead and make a shade lighter for the ailerons. Second to Q-tips and toothpicks, it's going to be sticky notes on the tool tip for the day, because sticky notes are not sticky at all. They won't peel the paint off 100%, and also you just hold them down and they peel off with a nice sharp line after you're done with them. Next, I applied blue tack to the surfaces that are staying the white color. This blue tack I picked up from Home Depot, and I think it's just Loctite, and this stuff works great. It sticks well and also comes up really easily. And if there's any extra parts that get stuck to any surface, you can just use the blue tack to pick it up itself. If you just place it on the model, it won't stick that well, so what I do is I actually use a paintbrush and I just roll it on the surface just to stick it to the model better. This ends up making it really nice and the lines end up being sharper in the end. I apply this everywhere where there isn't going to be that blue paint. On the blue Avenger, which is George Bush's airplane, the airplane was blue and also it looked like the edges were faded, so I just opted to follow the instructions on this and use the blue tack to mask off the areas. On the gray one, I used all tape, so all the edges were actually nice and straight. So this is the first step to airbrushing the medium gray color, and what I do is just go around the lighter areas and just add a little bit of tone and color to those white areas, so it covers it up just enough. Then I just use light coats to mask and cover the rest of the airplane, making sure to not leave any heavy strokes of paint or just too much paint somewhere to ruin all the modeling work that I did earlier. This is done with about 50% thinner Vallejo paints to ensure that it doesn't cover up too much of all that nice work that I did beforehand. Now with George Bush's blue airplane, I highlight all the panel lines with the actual color that's blue. This works out really good, and I've done this several times for my other blue airplanes, and it seems to work well. As it is such a dark blue, even if you use black, you're not going to see much difference between the blue and the black. So I just went ahead and highlighted these panel lines with the blue color, and that was my first base coat for this color here. For this typical lighter modeling color area, I just highlighted the panel lines with the paint that I was going to be painting with. And this really is an easy step just for your first marking on the airplane, just to get that paint down and make it look good and nice and weathered. Also, typically looks a little bit sun damaged too, which is what you want anyways. This doesn't have to be perfect, as there are going to be different other things that I'm doing to the inside of the panels so that there's more highlighted details. And also, the panel lines aren't perfect on purpose. And if you see too much going on here, it doesn't look like that off of camera. It just looks like that on camera. I then highlight the panel lines with some brown, and this adds to a great look for the model, as it adds a different tone other than just black to these seafaring airplanes. This, I'm a little bit more careful with the panel lines, as I don't want to ruin the color that I just put on, and I want to make sure that you can definitely see the inside of the panels with the blue color. Next, I go around with a lighter blue color. I added some white and some PRU blue to it to make it kind of highlight a different type of tone and texture. I just wanted to make it look a little bit sun damaged and make it look like it wasn't so uniform. It's basically the same thing I did on the underside, just on the fuselage now. I would suggest this on pretty much every single model kit, as it does add a lot of life and a lot of difference between the panels, and it's just a really good way to go about it. Next, I wanted a deep contrast between these panels, as this dark blue was pretty dark. I mean, honestly, it was the middle tone blue color, but it was a pretty dark color. So I mixed some green and yellow together to get a nice bright green, and I felt that that was good, as there was an underside of zinc chromate on these planes anyways, so it kind of made sense. After I finished a light coat of that area, not covering up too much of my work, I then taped off all the areas that needed to be done so that I could paint the rest of the airplane deep blue. There's a lot of masking to be done, which wasn't all done on camera. There's a lot more satisfying things to watch other than that. I went ahead and used the same process as I did on the fuselage to the deep blue as well, as this color is so close to black that it's not going to matter whether I use black or this blue on this color. So I went ahead, used the blue, and it worked out great. I just made sure to not spray it too much. Now, I am no expert at model paints or whatever, so I definitely used mission models on this kit, and I've had my problems with mission models. I don't know where I'm going wrong, but it peels off like butter. It literally comes off like butter. So I want to recommend this paint, as it sprays really well right out of the bottle, but I can't recommend it because it literally just falls apart on me every time. So even when I'm applying decals, even after several clear coats, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I must be doing something wrong, because their paint is really nice. I just wish I was able to use it. But going ahead forward, I paint all these different panels and stuff, different colors, and then lightly coat the panels with that blue color to make it all blend in nice. And as you can see the difference. You can see the sun damage. You can see everything that's going on. You can see this kit went through hell. So it really did come out really good, and I'm really happy with my abilities to do this darker color. And now we can get on to some great tape pulling. I always try to pull my tape at a 45-degree angle so that it doesn't peel any tape off. It's just an important tip to make sure and know. I painted for 7 years, so I know what I'm talking about here. If you pull at a 45-degree angle, you're almost never going to have problems. If you pull your tape with a gloss coat on it, that's a bad idea, because if you have a gloss coat on it, it tends to peel on you. But if you put a matte coat on it or anything flatter than that, then you're good to go. And as you can see, I achieved a very sharp, nice line with this paint. And I just went ahead a little bit, and now I'm doubling back, and I just realized that I mixed these two up as I was recording this. So what actually ended up happening is I actually sprayed the inside of the panel lines for the gray one, not the blue one. But either way you do this, you're able to achieve the same effect, basically. Now I have about 80% thinner to paint ratio, and I'm doing really light coats of this gray color on this airplane. And that ensures that I don't coat it too much and make sure that it looks sun damaged and weathered at the final end of it. I really prefer this method as I do think it highlights most of the detail without putting too much work into it. So just go ahead and model the interior of the paint lines. It takes a little bit of time, but you don't have to put a lot of time into the rest of the kit if you do that process first. And then after that modeling is done, you can just apply nice and thin coats to the outside and it should look great. Now I'm peeling off this tape. And as you can see, again, 100% success. And on this kit, I actually used all Vallejo paints. I didn't use any Mission Models paints, so I wasn't worried at all. I had complete confidence in my skills and the work that was done to not pull off any paint. And again, I'm pulling at a 45-degree angle back so that it doesn't, just in case, it doesn't peel off any paint. Pay attention to these paints as well, because they could have a slightly higher sheen, and if they are a gloss coat paint, they could actually tear a little bit easier, or peel a little bit easier than other paints. So I didn't have to apply a matte varnish to get this to peel right, so just pay attention to that on your paints. If it says gloss on the bottle, just go ahead and make sure to apply a matte coat after you're done with it, and then peel the tape. It'll help a lot. I peel the tape off of the rest of the kit. As you can see, it's very, very oddly satisfying, and all my tape peeled off just fine. Also, all of the blue sticky tack as well. Now I can apply the decals. Finally, I can get to this point. So with this kit, it's an older kit, and I did have some problems with the decals. It was about 68 degrees, maybe 66 degrees in my house. So this made it very tricky to do decals and not have them crack on me. And it's kind of a weird process with these older kits. So I had to use some Mark Fit. After I had applied the decals and adhered them to the surface, it seemed like they didn't really shrink in as much. So what I had to do was apply some Mark Fit to the outside and use a heat gun to actually dry it. And this is the process right now that I'm actually drying in real time that decal, heating that glue up on the back of it. And then I take a cotton swab and wipe it all down, and that seemed to adhere the surface. I did this 3 to 4 times more just to get it all the way down to the surface, and that ended up being fine. Make sure that your heat gun isn't too close to the model, and make sure that you don't do this step too much. You can see right there where that paint is actually coming off from this decal solution. So there is your first-hand experience on how brittle this paint is, and I don't know why it's like that. I use the same technique on all these decals. I actually put them on with Microsol and Microset first, and then went back and used the Microfit with the heat gun after that, because I realized that they were all flashing and there was a lot of problems with them. So one thing I want to mention with dealing with old decals, it's kind of weird and kind of freaky at the same time. So you have an old kit, you have these decal solutions, blah, blah, blah. If your room is too cold, this could happen to you, which is what happened in my room. My room was like 68, 66 degrees, and what ended up happening is, since my decal solution was warm and I pulled the decal out, it actually, you could hear it crack. Like it literally popped. And it's kind of weird, and it happened with every single one of them because my room was too cold. So make sure when you pull your decal out, you're ready to go on your model. There's no time to wait. There's no time like today. And get that thing on the kit so that you have time to work with it. Next, I apply some wires to the wheels. This is just some simple plain black train wire, and I just glued them on with super glue. Now I can put the spinner on and move on to the next step and finally get this thing out of my way. At this point in the build, I get a little bit antsy to get this thing done and get it out there, so I just take simple steps to complete this process, as most of the weathering was done with the airbrush. But I used some Ammo MIG panel line wash, basically. It's just a dark brown, black brown wash, and this usually works out pretty good for most of my models. It is really thick as I mixed it up pretty good, but I kind of like that because you want that color in there as the contrast. This can be taken off with just a dry paper towel or dry anything, but if you need to take it off more than that, then you can also wet a brush with some mineral spirits, and that works too. Now I can finally take off this masking tape. So I hope you enjoy all this work of peeling off the tape. It is super satisfying to watch and also super rewarding that all the tape lines came out pretty good. I'm using a toothpick to just push out the corners to where they need to be lifted up with a pair of tweezers so that I don't scratch the actual undersurface. Now I can slowly peel off that tape one piece by one piece, making sure to pull it off at a nice angle so that it doesn't peel off any of my tape lines. I do recommend washing any of these clear parts as they can become a little bit oily, and some of your lines will come off if it's an older kit. But it didn't happen too much on this one, so that was good. I also want to point out the pair of tweezers that I have. Sometimes I get a really bad grip on my tweezers, so I use these ones, and they actually have a hook on one end, and it's like it's not purposeful. I actually bent it on accident recently, and it actually worked out really good for peeling tape. I always had problems with like gripping it and grasping it, but ever since one of those ends was bent, this thing works like a charm now. And I also know that this is not the most accurate rendition of the TBF Avenger. This is an older kit, and I build the kits the way they're supposed to be built because one, I kind of like it. I think it's funny that the cross joints are super big and the interior has no detail. I think it's hilarious that literally the inside is just completely flat, and I just make do with what I have, and that's what I like modeling like. I just find building kind of funny and oddly satisfying for that standard. To build a nicer kit, I'll use a nicer kit, you know what I'm saying? So that's just me. That's just how I build and how I operate. What I also found useful was I actually clipped the toothpick in half so that it wasn't so bendy when I went to go peel this stuff off. So I actually broke this thing in half and used that as a peeling stick. That seemed to work pretty good, as it did bend and break and stuff, and it's had the potential of ruining the plastic parts. Then I can peel the rest of this tape off satisfyingly, and hopefully get to the images here soon. I actually did want to show this and how slowly I pull and like how detailed I pull in real time, because this is a really delicate process, and I did have a little bit of problems with paint peeling up on this one. So I just wanted to show you how slow and how careful I really am when I do this process. And you can see on this one, it did peel up the paint on this one because I just wasn't slow enough. I didn't pull at a 45-degree angle, and I was rushing at this point, and that's why it happened. Next, I'm putting the turrets in, and you have to put these in backwards, tilt them forwards a little bit, and squeeze them into that little hole, and then twist them around once it's in that really little hole. Then they twist around just fine. And they move around really good too, as you can see. This part was a bit finagly. I did mess with it quite a bit, but it ended up working up in the end. And this is the blue one I'm doing too. Just to show you how finagly it kind of is. Because it's kind of nerve-wracking to put these parts into place when you're supposed to, so yeah. And since I applied this clear glue that allows you to remove it and put it back on, it fits on perfect just like it left. Now I can use some silvering techniques to really dust up this model and make it look weathered and realistic. So again, I just use a silvering sponge and just go around the model nice and damply with a really dry sponge actually at this point, just to get it a nice cloudy look at first, and then I go back with a wetter sponge to get it a nice crisp metallic look. I still use different parts of the sponge so it doesn't look too coherent and too perfect all the way around, having the same texture everywhere. Then I do the same thing on the other side, just less, with a wetter sponge to give it a really different texture. With having a wetter sponge, you really have to be careful how much you press down on the model, as that's when the most paint's going to come off. Next, I can finally get some nice weathering on the exhaust streaks here. And I just use this powder stuff. I've been using this every time, and I haven't had any issues with it whatsoever. I'd like to use the airbrush, but this powder streaking is just, kind of works really good. It doesn't look good right now, but once I blend it in with a little bit of water and a little bit of brushwork, it's super nice. This is the legit way to go. It's super easy too. With the airbrush, you're always worried about, oh crap, don't mess it up, don't do this, don't do that. With this stuff, you just wash it right off with water. I mean, it's so simple. If anything goes wrong, just wash it right off with water. It comes right up. I mean, that's the most legit thing. With the airbrush, I'm always tripping out, just making sure that I don't screw up and I don't put too much on, and because you can't wash it off. But this step really, really worked. I then use a very old brush to do all these corners, and I wanted to make it so that you could tell that the wing moves. So I just dusted in and lightly weathered these corners of the ailerons and stuff like that. I just put the paint on the brush and then lightly dabbed it onto a paper towel, as this dried it up enough. Now I'm weathering these oil streaks on this thing, and this is going to be the final step. I use a dark brown oil wash on this, and then use some mineral spirits to do the streaking effect so that it looks like wind has flown over the wingtop. I like using the long type of brushes for this because I think it makes it a better look. This is the last step to this build, so thank you guys so much again for watching and subscribing, and please, if you didn't subscribe, please consider to do so, as it does help me out. And also, I just thank you, every single one of you, for watching, and appreciate every subscriber and every viewer. So thank you guys so much. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, blah blah blah, all those things. I don't post much on there. I just try to stick to the YouTube thing, but these things came out really awesome, and I can't wait to show you my next build. It's gonna be awesome. This is one I've been looking for forever, so I'm super excited to build this and get it out to you. So thank you guys so much again for watching. Let's get back to building. Enjoy the rest of the pics.